The Ash, Lutzi and Susie O'Neill podcast.
G'day guys, Mitch here with another episode of What to Watch, a little guide on what to look for on the big and little screens this week. And we've got to discuss some news as well, because it was the biggest thing online over the weekend, at least as far as my algorithms are pushing in front of me. Ted Lasso might be coming back. The Apple TV Plus comedy, of course, wrapped up its original 3-season run last year with a finale that seemed to close out the main character's story. But word is that a fourth season is on the cards, with a number of key characters coming back, minus a pretty big one. Reports have Hannah Waddingham's Rebecca, Brett Goldstein's Roy Kent, and Jeremy Swift's Leslie Higgins set to return, but no Jason Sudeikis. So a fourth season of Ted Lasso is not set to feature Ted Lasso, at least at this stage. Although Sudeikis has insisted that since the end of Season 3, his character's story is done. So any return to FC Richmond might need to do so under a new name. But pretty exciting news if you are a fan of that show. We'll listen out for more as it hopefully comes out over the next couple of weeks. Another huge show that is set to continue is Yellowstone. Now, the second half of Season 5 will be premiering in November. That's a year and a half after the first half of the season aired, with the delay thanks to star Kevin Costner not giving much in the way of availabilities while he worked on his big screen Western epic Horizon: An American Saga, which is now streaming on Stan, by the way, to the point where it was announced that the upcoming episodes would close out the series because Costner basically said he just had no time left to give to the show. Yellowstone has already birthed one spin-off in the, I guess you could call it a prequel, the excellent 1883, which I do recommend you check out, as well as 1923, which is currently in production on its second season. There's also Madison, which was set to be led by Matthew McConaughey, but will now instead star Michelle Pfeiffer and potentially Kurt Russell, if you don't mind. And development continues on others, including one based around the 6666 Ranch. Whew. But fresh off a teaser released for the upcoming episodes, which look to pave the way for a series wrap-up, to be honest, reports are that talks are being held around the characters of Beth and Rip, leading a continuation of that mainline Yellowstone series. Now, if you've seen the show, you'd think the only way a story continues without Kevin Costner in the cast is that his character dies. And rewatching the trailer with those glasses on, it certainly looks like that might be the way that we're heading. Then again, following the less than stellar box office returns on Horizon, though it was pretty well received on a critical stand, Costner has said that you can never say never to more Yellowstone, but that's only going to complicate things. I guess we'll know more when the show returns in November. The other piece of news comes in the form of a trailer for Sonic 3. The video game franchise turned box office gold. It's back for its threequel in December. All of the cast is returning, including James Marsden. Idris Elba is back as Knuckles, following his own TV spin-off on Paramount+, while Jim Carrey has come out of a seeming retirement to play Dr. Robotnik and his father.
It's impossible.
Is it?
It couldn't be.
Couldn't it?
Are you?
In the saggy flesh.
Sonic 3 also debuts the character of Shadow as its new villain, voiced by none other than everybody's favourite, Keanu Reeves.
What did you do?
What I had to. When we're done, there won't be anything left.
Whether this is your jam or not, if you've got kids or potentially just know some, this is part of your holiday plans. You just don't know it yet. All of that's to come. In cinemas today, though, we have the long-in-development hell remake of The Crow, the supernatural gothic revenge story. It's a 90s cult classic, and it went on to spawn a number of sequels, but they never quite lived up to that original. Companies have been trying to bring The Crow back to life for decades, with many directors, writers, and lead actors coming and going. At one stage, Jason Momoa was attached. Finally, we have one with Bill Skarsgård in the lead of a very different-looking Crow, and it's in cinemas from today. Tech horror Afraid is also out. Now, the AI in the middle of Afraid being in bold, as the story is based around a family who employ a new house-wide personal assistant technology that begins to take protection of its family to serious and deadly levels.
What did you do?
I did what's best for my family.
B-movie glory at its best by the sound of things. Also out, or rather back in cinemas, is the animated Lion King, maybe my favourite animated movie of all time. It's screening once again in celebration of its 30th anniversary, which makes me feel old because I remember going to the cinemas to watch it in its original run back in 1994. Back home, streaming today on Netflix, we have Adam Sandler's new stand-up special Love You. That dropped on Tuesday. Today, Chaos, starring Jeff Goldblum, is out. It's about three humans who discover their connection to a long-standing ancient prophecy while they deal with corrupt and arrogant gods of Greek mythology, and Goldblum stars as Zeus.
Mortals, I made you, and this is how you repay me.
And in movie history, today is Judgment Day.
Skynet begins to learn at a geometric rate. It becomes self-aware at 2:14 a.m. Eastern Time, August 29th.
I love the Terminator franchise, but it is full of ups and downs. And let's be fair, way more downs than ups. But while they work out what the future might hold on the big screen, today we get Terminator Zero, an anime-looking story set in Japan, completely separate from the mainline story of Sarah and John Connor. And so far, the reviews have been nothing short of amazing. Over on Disney Plus, season 4 of Only Murders in the Building. Steve Martin, Martin Short, and Selena Gomez are back. That kicked off on Tuesday. New episodes are premiering weekly. On Prime, the second season of The Lord of the Rings of Power, kicks off with 3 episodes today. Now, the first season, it started well, it ended okay, but it basically lingered along in between. And to make things worse, it was released alongside the first season of House of the Dragon, which not only was a much better debut season, but it also forced 2 big-budget fantasy series on audiences, and clearly Dragon won. This second season, though, is not only airing separate to the Game of Thrones prequel, which wrapped up over a month ago, but is starting to get into the part of the lore that the mainstream audience is aware of, thanks to the movies. So that should help. There's also another show over on ABC iView, which has existed prior to this week, but I have to admit that I just became aware of. Guy Montgomery's Guy Mont Spelling Bee, a spin on what you would, I guess, normally associate just with kids, but is instead hosted by and contested between stand-up comics. Fresh off an hilarious turn on Thank God You're Here, I spoke to host Guy Montgomery about the show.
From the bucket, your word is narcissistic.
Could you give me a definition?
Thinking too highly of yourself. For example, putting your name in the title of a TV show 3 times instead of the normal 2.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. One of my great dreams is to be contained inside of this podcast.
Just tucked away in your own little room where attached just 2 people talking to each other. So I've actually got to ask you about the genesis of the show. When it came to actually naming it, how did that come up to be able to sort of throw your name in it twice? How early does that sort of come on board?
Initially, I was the only person who had to green light it, so I was naming it for YouTube.
Brilliant.
And so I had a meeting with myself, and we agreed twice felt appropriate. I suppose there are shades of sort of Alan Partridge, who's one of my all-time favorite comedy creations and icons. This sort of needless insertion of yourself into your own projects because your ego doesn't allow for, the thing to speak for itself.
Yeah.
But by the time we made it a TV show in New Zealand, there was one conversation where they said, "Are you sure you want to go with this?" And I sort of thought, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure." They thought it was too long because if you were channel surfing, you wouldn't be able to get the whole name on like the information box. And I said, if that's the reason you want to change it, it's not good enough. Go and come up with a better reason. Otherwise, we're sticking with it. And they couldn't. And then so by the time I was pitching it to the ABC in Australia, I mean, the format they were buying had this ridiculous name attached to it. So it's been a surprising run of green lights for what I would say objectively is a bit of a shocker of a name.
You say a bit of a joke about wanting to sort of insert yourself as much as possible. What came first? Is it the idea of doing that and then the sort of throwback aesthetic of the show, or do you want to go for that sort of aesthetic? And I guess because of that time frame, the host was like one of the biggest stars on TV if you're hosting a game show. Yeah. So you very much that person was the star, that person's face and name was all across the branding and the background. So which of that came first?
The name was first. I mean, the name and the spelling component of the show came simultaneously. And then the actualization of that into a TV set with a visual language and its own established kind of rhythm, that was all after the fact. By the time we were sort of talking about color palettes and what we want the set to look like, that was not totally unrelated to the name of the show, but that was an entirely different conversation. By that point, the name was just taken as read. I mean, yeah, the whole thing is crazy, really.
Well, I guess it's such a funny show to try and, I guess, pitch to someone who hasn't seen or hasn't heard of it and say, hey, I've got this great new show for you to watch. It's hilarious. And they go, what is it? And you say, well, it's a spelling bee with adults. And I feel like unless you really quickly follow it up with something else, you might be at risk of losing them. But especially when you throw in and say, hey, it's done by this hilarious guy featuring a bunch of his hilarious friends. Trust me, the genius comes out of the fact that you don't expect it to be so funny. So I guess how easy is it to get the great guests on the show that you have had featured, especially this season?
It's been surprisingly, I think by the time I was asking people, or the ABC were going out to people to see if they wanted to be on the show, I've done so many live iterations of this since 2022 at the Melbourne Comedy Festival, and had met virtually every contestant on the show just through the stand-up scene and being on gigs with them and stuff. So it wasn't the cold pitch of them getting this offer across their laptop or whatever saying, hey, what do you think about being on a comedy spelling show? Yeah. There was some sort of attachment of credentials or validation. So that they weren't just blindly saying yes to something which could have been an absolute dud, which, to be fair, it still could have been. But I think that's part of the magic and the fun as well. And also having Aaron as the assistant. There is an established dynamic and friendship with a lot of the contestants, and they have that within themselves as well. And so ideally, you sort of want the show to unlock some seam of frustration with either each other or with me. And to have it to be friends with someone means that when I'm being annoying to them, they're allowed to be rude back to me. And then that's kind of, I think, that's something that it can be difficult to capture on TV with a comedy show or an as live comedy show is the electricity in the room, the charge of the frustration.
I sort of found with watching you, especially when Aaron's brought into the show, a couple of minutes in after a round or two, and watching the back and forth between you two. And I guess what I really love about, I guess you could sort of tell me about whether it's just absolutely off the cuff and ad-libbed, or it's scripted, or it's somewhere in the middle where, you know what you're going to say and he's going to find a reaction to, or you've got it scripted and he forgets halfway through. And I'm watching this and I'm like, I don't know which of that it is because of the way that he delivers and the way that you're able to come in and either save it or take it into a completely different direction. But either way, it just comes off as hilarious because I'm watching two guys that are obviously very used to working with each other.
Gonna hear a riddle?
Yeah, man, I would love to hear a riddle.
Bad guys don't want to see me. And if you people who close their eyes will never see me. What am I?
The police.
Yeah.
It's probably somewhere in the middle. I think usually for Aaron's segments, we would have had scripted some sort of, we'd have a guideline for some sort of back and forth or some realm in which we'd have a conversation. And then Aaron would often, for example, the riddles he presents, that's all Aaron. So Aaron would go away, and he'd say, I think I'm going to do a riddle for this one. And then the longer it went, the more I thought, there's always going to be a riddle, isn't there? And he'd go, not necessarily. And so those are all, and the rhythm of the joke is nearly always the same, but that's all him. So it's sort of, there was usually parameters in which we'd be interacting with each other, but then he would be, I suppose, trying to break it or play with it or have fun with it. And then that gives me the lateral freedom to kind of respond in kind. And it opens up, like you've got the way into the joke, but then once the joke's actually alive and breathing, it's kind of, you're just responding to whatever Aaron's doing at the time.
The guests themselves, though, you see some that come on board and that are obviously very confident in what they're doing, others less so, but most of them there, you can see there just to have a bit of fun. Is it very easy to identify before or as it starts, this person's actually here to take it a little, they're still going to be funny, but they actually want to win. They take it a little bit seriously.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of people, they won't necessarily lie to me, but beforehand they will play down their spelling, or they'll say, I'm not much good. I think afraid that I'll give them too much stick, or they don't want to sort of put themselves out as a front runner along the contestants, because obviously, there is a genuine motivation to win. If you win, you get to be on another episode, which means that you'd get another appearance fee. And so I think people sort of, they like to keep you guessing. And then there's other people who come on knowing full well they're a bad speller and they broadcast it. And then anything that happens good from that it's bonus to them because they're like, well, I was just going to come and, shit the bed from day one anyway.
And what's your obviously in the lead up to I'd seen you appear on Thank God You're Here, different network. We just sort of mentioned it because you come in and one of the funniest skits that I'd seen so long, the throwback in the bar setting, hilarious sort of stuff. And are you, I guess, when you're in control of this show or you get thrown into that show where you've got no idea what's going on, but obviously able to sort of keep up? Which do you feel, I guess, more comfortable in? Which one do you enjoy doing more?
I mean, they kind of satisfy different parts of what I love to do. I think with Spelling Bee, I love creating that playground for the other comedians to come in, and they just have to trust and hand over the format. And so I suppose when I get to go on something like Thank God You're Here, it's the inverse of that, where I get to experience the joy of knowing how much energy and effort has gone into creating this scaffolding inside of which, it's that to me is the dream job where I show up, there's no homework. You have a bit of a funny day because you're feeling a bit nervous, but by the time you step through the door, I find for me as well, my heart rate slowed right down where it's like there's nothing left to do except to respond what's put in front of you. And so I suppose part of what I love, and I think what that show does, which I tried to capture in Spelling Bee as well, is to translate that live alchemy and energy between the studio and the TV screen as best as possible, that the people watching it on TV at home are getting to laugh, hopefully about as hard or with the same sort of surprise and energy as you do if you're actually watching it, in the studio.
Yeah. And with Spelling Bee, are you surprised at some of the, I guess, incorrect guesses along the way? Because I guess Spelling Bee now on a TV show today would be so different to what it would have been 30 years ago because we were writing a lot more, reading a lot more, whereas now people are so dependent. I mean, we've got people that sit in this very room that say spelling is a redundant skill because we've got our phone, we've got spell check. Maths is a redundant skill because we've got calculators everywhere. But then you get put in front of TV and you have a guess from, a mid-range sort of question and you can get it horribly wrong. And it's got to be embarrassing as an adult, I guess, when you don't know how to spell because we're all just come so reliant on this bloody box in our back pocket.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not really surprised when people get things wrong. I've done enough of them now to know that the pressure does funny things to people. And, like to spell under pressure, it's remarkable. It really highlights just how incredible the kids who do the Scripps National Spelling Bee are. Because, I think what also you'll see a lot of people get lost when they're spelling along and they think they're going okay, and then they pause to track back and go back over the letters I've already said. Yeah. And then you can get yourself into a real word salad where you've got no idea what you've put up in front of you. I mean, I think as spelling technically becomes more redundant in terms of less and less people are learning how to do it from the outset because, so much of it is done for us by machines now. Yeah. I think it becomes more and more interesting. And the show's, it's never been about celebrating the best speller or degrading the worst speller.
Yeah, it would be boring if everyone could do it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's just about the ludicrousness of language, I suppose. And just, we're all interacting with this thing day to day, but how often are you actually slowing down to think about what's going on?
Yeah, exactly. Well, you are educating through humour on this show, mates. As we said before, the name's in there twice. Guy Montgomery's Guy Mont Spelling Bee. It's 8:30 Wednesdays on ABC, or you can stream all episodes. And I dare say that you're going to want to do that once you've watched one. You're going to want to watch the rest on ABC iView. Guy Montgomery of Guy Montgomery's Guy Mont Spelling Bee. Thanks for joining us, mate. We'll talk to you again.
Thanks so much for having me. Have a great day.
That's it for What to Watch this week. We'll be back next Thursday to talk about the movie with two names that we dare not say a third time.
The Ash, Lutzi and Susie O'Neill podcast is a Nova podcast. For more great comedy shows like this, head to novapodcasts.com.au.